right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday morning online coffee and conversation. I'm Catherine Snyder with the Center for Spiritual Living Boulder Valley in Lafayette, Colorado. And the Centers for Spiritual Living is an organization that teaches that each of us is a divine being, that what we say and what we think matters, and that you can change your life by changing what you think. And our vision as a passion is to inspire all of us to do that, to relearn how to be in the world in a way that's really healthy and really loving. We start each one of these talks with a type of prayer that we call affirmative prayer. It's not about beseeching an outside God. It's about inviting that divinity within each of us to come forward in a really great and loving way. Each of us has our own manifestation of that divine energy. And this prayer is about being in it, declaring the truth of who we are and what this day will be. And today it's Jim Shink is going to do our opening prayer.
Okay. As I do with every opening prayer, let us take a deep breath and relax. Let all your worries, cares, and fears disappear. When all these feelings, these emotions, even the feeling of our own skin, put them back on the shelf and feel the presence. Feel the presence of everybody in this circle. Everybody that we talk to, see, and feel. Open up our minds and hearts to accept the message. Let it inspire us to evolve into our true selves and to go out in the world and share this with everybody. We are so grateful for the opportunity to share our insights into everyone's spirituality. And then let it go. Let it go, let it be, let it grow. Let it manifest your good intentions, knowing that your good is coming to you. And also, don't forget to love yourself. Love yourself, knowing that you are part of the unity of the world. And as we come back to ourselves, let us say together, and so it is.
And so it is. Thank you, Jim. Our speaker today is Reverend Lydia Joy Ayers, speaking to us from North Carolina. Reverend Lydia has been in Science of Mind since 2014. They became a practitioner at Universal Spirit Center in San Diego, California, 2018, a licensed minister in 2022 after completing their Master of Consciousness studies with the Holmes Institute. Currently based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, working on a Master of Divinity degree in Wake Forest University. They're pursuing professional chaplaincy, and their mission is to provide a space of compassion, grace, and wonder to those in spiritual need. I am very thankful that Lydia is going to be speaking to us today. So, Lydia, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Jem, for the prayer. Please let me know if you're not able to hear me well. I'm sure you're all familiar with the challenges of Zoom, but it's always funny to speak to an otherwise empty room. So just let me know, scream, wave, flail if you can't hear me. But it's really good to be here with you all today. I've been excited to speak with you and share time with you, and I love the the teaching chapter sort of coffee and conversation model. So I'm glad to be here today. It's noon where I am, but I still have my coffee just so that I'm part of the group. And let's get started. I had a conversation with Catherine a few weeks ago, and she let me know that it's pretty common for your chapter to follow along with the global themes for Centers for Spiritual Living. So we're going off of that today. If you've been keeping up through October, you'll be familiar. The theme for October is Power to the People. And the organization as a whole has been talking about harnessing our own internal power and learning to work with that power out in the world and learning to really use that power for collective good, which is something I'm very passionate about. It's one of the reasons I became a minister, is the idea of using the transformative power of this teaching and using the transformative power of the divine residing in each of us to really enhance lives, not only my own, but the lives of those around me. And ultimately, as y'all are certainly familiar with, create a world that works for everyone. So delighted to be here today discussing this topic. And today we're talking about shifting a little bit from this emphasis on personal power and more into a model of collective power. The power that comes when two or more are gathered in the divine name, in God's love, in awareness of what it is that we can do here, and really move forward with that power instead of keeping it focused on ourselves or sort of limiting the expression of that power. We also get a real richness of perspective and an opportunity to dissolve our egos in a new way when we start thinking about collective power. I know that many of us probably, it sounds like a lot of y'all are practitioners, but a lot of us have the experience of dissolving our ego as we come into the awareness of the divine in ourselves, and dissolving our ego as we come to recognize our own personal power. And there's a whole nother step when we start to think about collective power. There's a whole nother step beyond that, which is a little scary and a little exciting and a little of everything all at once. And finally, as we talk about collective power, we'll talk about the importance of uniting around a common purpose. It is wonderful and it is all well and good to think about the power that we share as a community and as a world. And if we aren't aligned on what we're doing, then we can all sort of be pulling against each other, like the image that's coming to mind, those demonstrations they have at science museums for children of all the iron filaments. And if you use the negative side of the magnet, they all scatter. But if you use the positive side and tell them all to come to one place, they do. So our collective power can work very much like that. But first, we'll dive into personal power just a little bit. And this is something that Centers for Spiritual Living, Science of Mind is really, really good at. And this is a reason why so many of us come to this teaching. And earlier, before the service started, we were talking a little about Science of Mind and Centers for Spiritual Living existing as something outside of Christianity that people can come to. I think one of the big appeals is that we have this understanding of not only our personal divinity, but the power of God residing in each of us, or the power of the divine residing in each of us, rather than externally, rather than petitionary prayer, rather than petitionary language around God. We recognize that that is something that we are not only part of, but inextricably linked from. We are 100% of the divine, moving and bending and folding the way that the divine wants to here. It's a great, I almost said selling point. I hate that term, but it's a great benefit of our organization. It's one of the best things that we have to offer. And there's more beyond it. And I think sometimes as an organization, again, before service started, we were having just a conversation about the future of the organization. I think sometimes where we falter is we get so excited about the personal power that we forget to keep going. Organizationally, individually, I think sometimes it's a larger problem, or not problem, but a larger condition. But CSL is really good at personal power. We love our affirmations, right? We love our manifestations. There was a center that I was involved with for a long time that everyone there was, not everyone, but the group there was very excited about the concept of manifestation. And it was pretty common for people to share what they had manifested lately, and good for them. I am not at all dismissing that, not at all knocking that. But something that stood out to me was the perseverance on what I personally manifested for me. Most of y'all are probably familiar with Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith out of Agape in LA, and you may be familiar with his concept of the kingdoms of consciousness. If you're not, it's really interesting work, and it's something that I do recommend looking up. But his theory is that there are four essentially kingdoms of consciousness. I believe that this language is being updated because the word kingdom is a little maybe not the best. So if you're looking it up yourself, you may not find much under kingdom. I apologize. I'm not familiar with the current language here. I think they're updating it to states of consciousness. That's a whole aside. But these kingdoms of consciousness, there's kingdom one, which is to me mentality. Sometimes we call it victimhood mentality. Most of us are familiar with this who've been through a foundations class, which I imagine all of you have. This is life is happening to me. And then something that CSL does really well is second kingdom consciousness. Life is happening by me. I'm going to use my affirmations. I'm going to use my positive thinking. I'm going to change my thoughts and change my life. And you do. And it works. And it's incredible. And then there are two more stages. And sometimes we don't go there. That's okay, because everything is a learning experience. And as we know, it takes a certain amount of people to get comfortable with an idea before the next idea can come to fruition. So, second kingdom consciousness, third kingdom consciousness is as me. The divine life is happening as, oh, excuse me. The third kingdom is through me. I misspoke. The third kingdom is through me. God is happening through me, in me, around me, with me. We get here, we're familiar with this language from our prayers. And then the fourth kingdom is as me. God is showing up right here and right now as the consciousness that I am, as the way that I move about in the world. So in CSL, we're really, really great at second kingdom. And I won't waste a lot of time on this. There is a problem with some of this language that I'm sure some of you have already noted. It's very hierarchical. It's not intended to be hierarchical. This is more like stages of development, not, ooh, you're only in second kingdom and I'm in fourth. This isn't meant to be dismissive. This isn't meant to be harmful. This is just a stage of development. And sometimes we have to use numbers, even if that's maybe not, the best. Anyway, that's a whole personal aside of mine that I won't bore you with this morning. Second kingdom thinking. We're very good at this in CSL. We use this a lot. And what we can do is we can start using this for the collective instead of the individual. And I don't know, your teaching chapter as well as I know others. And this really varies community by community. There are some communities that are very, very invested in the life of manifestation and princesses parking spots and palaces, which I didn't realize some people were still saying until recently, because when I was introduced to that phrase, I was told that this is what they used to talk about in the 80s. But hey, that's great. And then some centers are less interested in the manifestation life, and we start moving a little bit further. But when we tap into our own individual power, because there's nothing wrong with our individual power, right? That's just one of the states of development. The idea is to keep it really clean. I like thinking of this as clean power too, because of course, with the environmental state that we're in, we hear a lot about clean energy, but what about clean personal energy, right? So to me, clean personal energy or clean personal power is power that isn't pushing on someone else or infringing on them. And also power that isn't smug and self-satisfied. And again, this is not to call anyone out, but I have seen some of our teaching in CSL be used to sort of put other people down. And something terrible happens and someone says, ooh, how'd you manifest that? Which again, I didn't know people were still saying, but I just heard a story last week that someone said that and I was a bit surprised. So really making our power clean. And the way that we do that is by focusing on our intentions and doing our own work. Again, anyone who's been through a foundations class, seems like this chapter is really on point with all of the teaching. So you've probably been through foundations, you may have been through prac. You understand the importance of doing that internal work and understanding where you are coming from in the things that you are manifesting, or in what you are praying for, or in the thoughts that you are thinking to control your life. Where am I thinking? Like, where am I coming from in this? Is this coming from wanting to be smug? Is this coming from wanting to be the best manifester at the center? Or is this coming from a place of wanting to remember that, yes, the life happens by me, but the divine is also happening through me and as me? Ernest Holmes in A New Design for Living says, "We have conscious access to a creative power which is ready, willing, and able to respond to us constructively. Our conscious and specific use of it is limited to our awareness or understanding of it." And again, part of developing this clean power is remembering that our awareness and understanding of it is never going to be complete. So always being at least open, always being ready to take those next steps, to remember the next stages of consciousness, or to remember that there is something else here that is happening that maybe I can't see. So instead of really digging my heels in on what I know I can do what I know I can do and be open to something more. I think we forget the something more sometimes. I know I do. Maybe I should just speak for myself here. I apologize. I know that I do. So if any of this feels like I'm calling you out, I'm calling me out. Let's just be clear here. So as we start to think about collective power and the power of community, we have to ask ourselves if we just stop at the personal. It's fine if that's what you want to do. Do you take your princesses, palaces, parking spaces, and call it a day? Or do you keep going for something more? Or do you recognize that there is something beyond the personal here that is happening that I can take part in, that we can take part in? As I was getting this talk ready, I was thinking about the American rugged individualism, which has its merit, I won't pretend it doesn't, but also is proven to be kind of an unhealthy way of relating to the world around us, keeping ourselves isolated, keeping ourselves as these silos that only worry about ourselves and are only responsible for ourselves, and cannot rely on one another and cannot rely on our communities, cannot build communities that are interdependent, but instead demands that each of us just be capable of doing it all on our own. And we know that's unhealthy. The more and more we learn about the natural world around us, too, the more we're learning that that's not how anything works. Again, as I was working on this talk, I went down a rabbit hole about aspens and mycelium networks. I had to think about how to pronounce that word for a moment. I always want to call it mycoplasma because my previous career was nursing, but not mycoplasma. Catherine nodded when I said it, so ask Catherine how to pronounce this word. It looked like she was familiar with it. Anyway, fungal networks that exist almost everywhere underneath the ground that connect all kinds of plants to one another. And these networks are how plants and entire forests and ecosystems can share information, they can share nutrients, they can share support, they can ward off invasive species. They do so many amazing things through these underground networks that we didn't realize existed because they're microscopic, but nevertheless, they're there. And I wonder how much there is for us to learn from that as people, because you may look like an individual and so do I, but we all know that we're all part of the same one, right? As is the forest. And I know y'all are in Colorado, so you're probably familiar with aspen. Aspen trees are single organisms, not just the tree, the whole aspen. I found out that it's called a clone, which is interesting, but the whole aspen forest is one organism, all sharing their root structure. And collectively, they take care of the entire forest. One single tree is not responsible for being one single healthy tree. One single tree is supported by the entire forest, by the entire root network and the mycelial network underneath it. sharing resources, receiving input, collectively I don't know how this works, but apparently it collectively decides when it's time for a new tree to sprout and where's the best place for that to happen. It's incredible. So I know what I will be deep diving on this week, but how much as people, and especially how much as spiritual people who understand the importance and the power of our thoughts, how much do we have to learn from these organisms that know that they're dependent on one another? And how much more support can we give our community if we know that this is how organisms function on the earth? This week, I've also been thinking a lot about the civil rights movement and the collective struggle for rights that Black Americans faced in the 60s. And I think when we start talking about things like power to the people and collective power, of course, we think of these big protest movements, and there are plenty of them today. I was thinking about the bus boycotts and Martin Luther King Jr. and letter writing campaigns, and this isn't always Centers for Spiritual Living and Science of Mind doesn't always love the thought of direct action. And I understand the point. I have heard many people say, I want to stay in principle. I don't want to get bogged down in the effect. I don't want to focus on the effect. I want to focus on the principle here. So then when something happens like a protest or political divisiveness or anything else that really has us worked up, sometimes we can be at a loss for what to do. I'll go ahead and show my cards. I'm a little bit more on the direct action side of things. When I was in ministerial school, there was a bit of a schism in between many of the budding young ministers. About half of my classes felt that we should get really involved in current events, and about half of my classes felt that we shouldn't because we should stay in principle. And I understand both sides of this perspective. I get it. But I think that there's a third way, and I'm going to tell you about that third way now. So you're all familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I'm sure, and many of the other civil rights leaders. Are we familiar as a group with Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman? Does that name ring a bell? All right. Doesn't seem like it. Get ready. You're going to love Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was a civil rights thought leader, mystic, professor, and one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, just one of them. He worked with Gandhi. He went to India to visit Gandhi when Gandhi was protesting the British. He learned a lot from Gandhi about the ideas of nonviolent resistance. He brought those ideas back with him and influenced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's been called the patron saint of the civil rights movement. He was born in Florida. His grandparents were slaves. His grandmother was a very religious woman, and after slavery ended, she took it upon herself to really influence his spiritual development. There was a preacher that his grandmother went to listen to when she was enslaved, and there's a word in this quote that I'm not going to say. Y'all can figure out what the word is. But this enslaved preacher would say to the enslaved people, you are not worthless. You are not slaves. You are a child of God. And this was repeated by his grandmother much through her life and really became the basis that Howard Thurman's spirituality developed on. He was an early mystic. He never would have called himself that. But even as a child in his childhood, he found connection with God and nature. He spoke to oak trees. He was known for walking on the beach. As an adult, he excelled academically, of course, and he also founded the first integrated church in the United States, the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco. He was a mentor to Martin Luther King and others. And at times he was criticized for not participating in the marches and in the sit-ins and in the bus boycott. He didn't live in the South. He lived in San Francisco at the time, but he was criticized for not participating more actively in the civil rights movement. But in his teaching and his preaching and his writing, he supported the movement. And he ultimately provided what became the theological and philosophical bases of the movement and of much of Black and liberation spirituality today. We have Howard Thurman to thank for a lot of contemporary theology, a lot of contemporary thought. And so my point in telling you all of this about Howard Thurman is that he didn't get involved at the streets level. He didn't think that that was his place. For one, he was older, but also that wasn't his place. If you can find many wonderful videos of him talking. He's a very calm, humble, grounded man. Not his place. But he understood the importance of thought, and he understood the importance of finding a spiritual basis for the active workout in the world. And he understood the importance of supporting the community in his way. He supported the community in the way that worked for him. And he didn't just think it, he created that space. He wrote letters, he wrote books. That doesn't mean everyone who doesn't go to a protest has to write a book. But he supported in the way that was right for him, and it worked. He also taught a lot about this primacy of spirituality and community, and that community is what the divine is calling us to. He was one of the first non-dual Christians that I'm aware of, and he was very, very wary of creating any delineation between people, which I respect. So how do we get there? How do we go from our own personal manifestations to supporting entire movements? And I think what's key here is the necessity of purpose. We need to know what we are thinking, what we are working, what we are praying for, what we are supporting. Again, something that Science of Mind does really well is we understand the importance of a mental equivalent. We understand the importance of knowing where we're trying to go before we get there. But what is a collective mental equivalent, and how do we go about finding one? Because you could poll any person on the street and everyone would have a different idea of what is a world that works for everyone, or what is the solution to political division in our country, or whatever other problem that it is that we want to face. I think the way to find this is think about what we agree on as humans and then work backwards. A wonderful teacher of mine once told me that I am becoming a chaplain, and a wonderful chaplain that I was working with and teacher of mine told me that we spend too much time trying to find things in common. We have our humanity in common, and that's enough. And I see his point, and I think that's a really beautiful perspective. We have our humanity in common. And as tempting as it is sometimes to think maybe that other political party just wants to hurt everyone, I know that they don't. No one wakes up and decides to be the villain today. No one wakes up and decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ruin the world. No political party thinks that either. But we may have very, very different ideas of how to get to a world that works for everyone. But we can agree on certain things. I'd be willing to bet money that I don't have that we could agree that everyone wants to feel safe. That we could agree that creating a society where everyone feels safe is a primary goal, where everyone feels secure, where everyone has enough to eat. So we find what we agree on and then we work backwards. We don't necessarily have to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but we can work backwards to think what does safety look like in my community? What does safety for people look like where I'm living right now? And start supporting that. When we do this, we also open ourselves up to diverse power and diverse perspectives. We get to focus on the collective. Focusing on collective good, focusing on collective mental equivalence means one voice or perspective doesn't get elevated over others. We start to take in other ideas. And the divine, being the divine that can handle all of it, takes that collective mental equivalent and creates what works for everyone, creates a middle ground, creates a third way, perhaps. It doesn't have to be built in divisiveness, but is built in all of us thinking about what we want instead of what we don't. It also helps us move beyond ego and second kingdom thinking. Instead of just focusing on what works for me, I start focusing on what works for everyone. And then I start seeing myself as a conduit for the divine. The divine is happening through me. Now I'm moving more into that third state. The collective good also fosters the individual good, just like the aspens or the fungal networks. As the network is healthy, it is able to produce more healthy fruit. As the network is healthy, it is able to produce more healthy individuals. Ernest Holmes says, our difficulty lies not so much in contradicting the truth as in cultivating an inner awareness, but a deep spiritual realization that we are one with all the power, presence and power that there is. This is one of my favorite things about Science of Mind, and it is also one of the easiest to forget. I am absolutely one with all that is, and so is everyone else. We are just one thing. There is a good that is for all of us. And the difficulty lies in remembering it and cultivating that awareness, because it's easy to forget because we look separate, but we're not. I'm going to end this with a portion of a prayer from Howard Thurman. Thurman says, give me the listening ear. I seek this day the ear that will not shrink from the world, that challenges me to deeper consecration and higher resolve. The word that lays bare needs that make my own days uneasy, that seizes upon every good, decent impulse of my nature, channeling it into paths of healing in the lives of others. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lydia. That was really powerful. Wow. I'm a little bit speechless at the moment. Okay, well, begin our discussion. First, let me say, all right, first let me say that before I stop the recording, I do want to just give a little plug for Centers for Spiritual Living, and also that here we believe that one gives where one receives spiritual nourishment and inspiration. So if you did find value in the message, if you want to contribute to our work, please make a love offering at cslbouldervalley.org/donate. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording now and we can begin our discussion. If you're watching this recording and would like to be part of our conversation next time, you can find the Zoom link on our website. Again, cslbouldervalley.org. We meet online via Zoom the first, third, and fifth Sundays at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. I hope to see you. All right. Gosh, that was just delightful. All right.